Hi, this is Tim with Moriel Radio and Moriel TV in England, and we're here for a conference, and this is This Week in Prophecy.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. Welcome to This Week in Prophecy, and as usual, quite a week it has indeed been. The big news this week will come to last. It is the change of power in Saudi Arabia that is imminent, some say due within the next 1 to 2 weeks. But leaving that for the moment, let's move on. We've been warning some time about the over-liberal policies of first the Bush government and then by the Obama administration under Hillary Clinton's State Department and John Kerry's, handing out visas to radical Muslims to come into the United States to carry on their trade. These have included terrorists such as the Boston Marathon bombers, who, although tipped off by Russian intelligence, were given visas nonetheless to come into the country and kill Americans. The same was true about the San Bernardino bombers. Again, the mainstream press and media did not hold either Hillary Clinton's State Department, John Kerry's State Department, or the Obama administration accountable for allowing these people in, but rather left-wing politicians, media, and agendaist judges acting unconstitutionally rallied to oppose the efforts of the Trump administration to protect Americans from these people getting into the country. One person who never should have been given a visa is, in our estimation, Ayat Orade. She is the editor of the first Arab women's magazine published in the United States, Noon al-Niswa. She's called out for radical causes multiple times, but referring back to the atrocious radical Islamic terrorist attack in Egypt that killed over 50 policemen, she began to celebrate it as if it were some kind of a righteous cause and some kind of a victory or a step forward, actually singing the praise of a terrorist attack that killed over 50 public servants in Egypt. Yet she's allowed to live in the United States and continue to function and operate in the United States as an editor of a women's magazine. Now, a person like this, if she's an American citizen, should be denationalized because she made immigration to the United States under obviously a pretense that was false. She did not accept our Constitution and our constitutional rights or our views of constitutional liberty when she is in favor of radical views of Sharia and singing the praises of terror. After the September 11th attacks, these things were supposed to stop, but they did not stop. They were allowed to continue, in fact, even aided and abetted by the Saudi placating Bush administration and by Barack Obama. Nonetheless, there she is, 50 policemen killed, and she's singing the praises of their killers, of their murderers, against the regime of General al-Sisi, the man who saved Egypt from the Muslim Brotherhood and from Barack Obama's support of the Muslim Brotherhood. That has been This Week in Prophecy. We see in Israel the reemergence of former Prime Minister Rosh HaMemshalah Ehud Barak, a military hero from the Israeli Labor Party. And he is seen statistically in most polls as the only person who would have a reasonable chance in an election against Benjamin Netanyahu. There are efforts in the Labor Party to try to revive him as an opponent to Netanyahu. Now, we have to understand something. In multiple aspects, we have parallelisms between what's taking place in Israel and what is taking place in the United States. Certainly, there is the advent of fake news by the mainstream media. Secondly, we have the use of the judiciary for political purposes. But thirdly, you have the opposition Labor Party, the equivalent of the Democrats, broadly speaking, in political disarray, looking for somebody who can beat the incumbent. Quite interesting. Now, Ehud Barak, when he was prime minister, made a solid offer of compromise on Jerusalem and on the West Bank. He offered a second Palestinian state in addition to the one that existed in Jordan. But it was firmly and flatly rejected by the Palestinian Authority and by the forces of Yasser Arafat. So even a left-center Israeli willing to compromise on a two-state solution and do everything and be everything that the European left and the American left-center want Israel to be and do was not good enough for the Palestinian Authority. It is futile to think it's going to be again in the future. Nonetheless, that is what is taking place in Israel this week in prophecy. Let us continue. There have been denunciations of propositions for a Marshall Plan for Gaza. A Marshall Plan for Gaza. First of all, Gaza is not nearly impoverished or destroyed as Europe was in the aftermath of the Second World War. On the contrary, the standard of living of Gazan Arabs increased by 370% under the Israelis from 1967 until the present regime of Hamas came to power. The destruction that is there was largely caused by Hamas, pilfering economic and material aid for the upgrade and rehabilitation of Gaza for military purposes and using civilian residential areas, hospitals, and schools, as well as civilian infrastructure for military purposes to launch rockets at Israel. So when Israel was forced to return fire in self-defense, as Israeli civilian settlements and towns were targeted on the Israeli side of the border, they played the victim with the help of, again, the left-wing media. So now there's been a call for a Marshall Plan. Actually writing welfare checks for people who have been radicalized and are under the control of Hamas is completely and utterly ridiculous. We are reminded that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are opposed now to Hamas, and that Hamas is essentially another tentacle of Iran. The outrage of the proposition itself is beyond stupid, yet there are many stupid people in mainstream academia and in the left-wing media and in politics. No Marshall Plan for Gaza. But let's continue. There was an outbreak of violent rioting at the Kotel at the Wailing Wall Plaza this week in prophecy.
U.S. Israeli Reform Jewish leaders roughed up at Western Wall by security guards. Major Reform Jewish leaders threatened with mace, accosted while attempting to bring Torah scrolls to Jerusalem holy site, called a rabbi. They tried to create a provocation. Read more following the link in the video description.
Ironically, though, it was not between Palestinian Arabs and Jews. It was between Reform Jews and the Israeli police authorities enforcing regulations that are in place because of the influence of ultra-Orthodox Jews who control the Kotel, who control the Wailing Wall Plaza. There is one area near Robinson's Arch which is an open prayer zone, where Christians, where people of other faiths even, can worship and pray at the Wailing Wall. But when Reform Jews attempted to open Torah scrolls and take Torah scrolls further in along the Wailing Wall, proceeding north towards the Rabbi's Tunnel, the trouble began. Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews became highly irate, and in order to avoid conflict, the Israeli police and the Temple Plaza authorities began to scuffle with the Reform Jews who were attempting to simply carry their Torah scrolls the way the Orthodox carry their Torah scrolls. We have quite a situation. Of the countries in the world, some would estimate it 50, that are democracies, the only one where Jews do not have freedom of religion is Israel. Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews deny freedom of religion to conservative Jews, to Reform Jews, and certainly to Messianic Jews. Jews who are Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox persuasion are fully capable, and as fully capable, of doing even to other Jews what anti-Semites did to them in the diaspora, to deny freedom to other Jews, imposing their interpretation of Judaism on others. There are marked differences between conservative Judaism and Orthodox, but wide differences between Reform Judaism and Orthodox, particularly ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic. The situation is so absurd is that every Israeli at the age of 18 upon finishing high school is a conscript into the military. No exceptions, unless you are Orthodox. Perceived as cowards and parasites by many secular Israelis who are forced to do the military, who are forced to interrupt their studies, their careers, the ultra-Orthodox receive subsidies to go to yeshivas and avoid military service on the basis of their beliefs. A high percentage of them are on welfare and public assistance. They see it as their right to be paid for going to a yeshiva and not having to defend the country. This irks many secular Israelis. It also irks many moderately observant Israelis called Masoretim, or traditional Jews, who are not irreligious, but or just not highly observant. The only country in the world's community of democratic nations denying freedom of religion to Jews is Israel. This has gone on since Ben-Gurion made a deal with the National Religious Party. The exemptions from military service, the subsidies to go to yeshivas. You know, a young Israeli university student will be expected to interrupt his studies, to perhaps lose a semester from a degree program if he's called up for the military, for military service. While the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox are paid to go to a yeshiva and have no military service. But they also restrict the freedom of religion. An Orthodox rabbi can be licensed and salaried by the Rabbinut and the Ministry of Religious Affairs, or controlled by them. The Ministry of Interior is to a large degree controlled by them over things like marriage, immigration, right to immigrate, and citizenship. Power that they've used certainly against Jewish believers and against Messianic Jews, and still continue to do so. This has been to the annoyance very often of many, many secular Jews and to Masoretim. Irking them also has been the fact that on a Israeli televised talent show called HaKokva Haba, literally translated the star to come.
We're backstage on the set of The Next Star, Keshet International's new reality sensation that was already sold to countries like France, Italy, and Germany.
What if God was one of us? Just a slave like one of us. Just a stranger of us.
It's true, the world of reality television is full of very successful talent shows from Pop Idol, American Idol, America's Got Talent, X Factor, or The Voice, to name a few. However, when Keshet International came up with their new format, Rising Star, they really hit a nerve with the industry, because the difference between their format to what we're used to seeing on TV today is that Rising Star is a totally interactive format that lets the audience at home decide in real time who will stay or who will leave the show.
An Israeli Messianic Jewish singer, Celil Goldman, won the approval of the judges and of the audience for her vocal performance. And she openly gave testimony about her faith in Yeshua and the faith in Yeshua of her rather large family. Openly speaking about it and stating it on Israeli television, on a widely viewed entertainment program. This does show that there is a change and a tension taking place in Israel between the ultra-Orthodox and the more tolerant, secularized Israelis and the Masoretim. The fact that she gave open testimony to her faith in Yeshua in no way colored the response the audience or the judges gave to her simply on the basis of her God-given natural singing ability. Well done, Celil, and we praise the Lord for the testimony she was able to give on television. This week in prophecy, Hamas has restated by its spokesman, Sami al-Zuri, that we will never recognize Israel's right to exist. This took place, however, at the Islamic conference in Istanbul, hosted under the auspices of the regime of the Erdogan government in Istanbul. At this conference, Sami Abu Zuri stated that diplomacy is not the only method that will work in trying to destroy the existence of Israel. We must resort to violence as a weapon in opposing Zionism. Again, hosted in Turkey, formerly a democratic nation, but which is no longer truly democratic under Erdogan, and a member of NATO, and is ostensibly allied with the United States and the West. But this is what is taking place in Istanbul under the Erdogan government. Somebody outwardly calling for the destruction of Israel by violent means, by means of terror, a spokesman for terror. We reported several weeks ago that there were certain political changes beginning to take place in Gaza, where there would be an attempted rapprochement between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. But we also predicted this was likely to break down. Well, thus far, our predictions have been accurate. It seemingly has broken down this week in prophecy. Also this week in prophecy, Sayed Nasrallah, who is the Shia leader of Shia Muslims in Lebanon, and in something of a spiritual or religious patriarch of Hezbollah, stated that the Saudis offered billions of dollars in economic aid, non-repayable to Israel, if Israel would bomb Iran. Now, Nasrallah has religious and political sympathies towards Iran, as do Hezbollah. He made this claim. Now, we're not suggesting that he is a viable or credible source of information about anything. But neither do we deny that there have been secret negotiations between the Israelis and the Saudi Arabians and the Trump administration concerning Iran. There is a secret rapprochement going on, as we reported, between the Saudis and the Israelis. Whether these financial figures have any merit or veracity to them, we do not know. Again, Nasrallah is not a credible voice of anything except for hatred, murder, terror, and lies. That being said, there is a truth in what is beginning to take place in terms of the rapprochement itself, coordinated by the Trump administration between the Israelis and the Saudis, and that has taken place this week in prophecy. Consistent with this week in prophecy, the Israeli Chief of Staff of the IDF, Gad Eisenkot, stated that the Israelis would be willing to share intelligence, including military intelligence, with the Saudi Arabians. Now, obviously, this would be focused on Iran, but it would also be focused on activities of Russia, Iran, and the Iranians in Syria and Iraq, as well as intelligence on Gaza and southern Lebanon involving Hezbollah and Hamas. For the Israeli Chief of Staff to say that Israeli intelligence, that Mossad and Israeli military intelligence, called Amon, would be willing to share data with the Saudis and expect the Saudis to share data with them, is a huge step forward. Very frequently in international diplomacy and in international strategic alliances, the sharing of intelligence preceded a more aggressive defense cooperation. This took place during the Cold War, when Anwar Sadat took Egypt out of the sphere of Soviet influences and began sharing intelligence information about the Soviets that he had accumulated with both the United States and with the Israelis. This is a way forward. It is, again, most interesting in light of what is transpiring overall in Saudi Arabia this week in prophecy. It is interesting to know that the Israelis this week gone beyond conventional use of military reconnaissance space vehicles for a small Israeli space vehicle to dock with the International Space Station. The step forward, which came from the Israeli company Space Pharma, put in a shoebox-sized device something that would have required something much larger and much more expensive to carry on certain kinds of measurements and experimentations from space. Hence, the Israelis have become a partner and a money-saving partner and a technology-including partner in the International Space Station. That has also happened this particular week. Now remember, the boycott movement of Israel has not gained momentum for various reasons. One of which is the Israeli contribution in research and development in agronomics and in computer technology. Too many American companies and certain European companies, as well as Israeli companies that are owned by American companies, have research for major American high-tech companies actually done in Israel by engineers who were graduated from the Israeli Technion. You have a high-tech belt north of Tel Aviv and Herzliya, and you have a smaller one in Haifa, not far from the Technion itself. You also have other outposts of high-tech development, largely in university towns, such as around Bar Ilan University in the Negev, close to Beersheba, and so forth. Israel punches well above its weight in high-tech engineering, particularly in the areas of research and development. A wide range of high-tech companies, not only Microsoft, others such as Motorola, are well invested in Israel in terms of technological innovation. We, this week in prophecy, have seen this graduate one step now into space exploration. Again, it will save money. There are always budgetary fights about budgets for NASA, budgets for the European Space Agency. There are always cost constraints. One of the first things to be hit very often during times of budgetary restraint is space programs. But by making these devices that can be projected into space and linked with the space station smaller and cheaper, the Israelis are now playing a role that will allow, or help allow, space exploration to continue at a much lower cost and a much less technically complicated operating capacity than has been the case. It is not insignificant what has taken place at the International Space Station this week in prophecy. But now to the big news this week in prophecy. It is widely rumored, even reported, that King Salman of Saudi Arabia is going to step down as king within the next 1 to 2 weeks. We've been reporting consistently on his son, Mohammed bin Salman al Saud, becoming the next king of Saudi Arabia.
Just in the last few hours, Saudi Arabia has sworn in several new government ministers to replace just a few of the more than a dozen who have been arrested over the weekend. Officially, the line coming out of Riyadh is that this is part of a crackdown on corruption, but a lot of analysts think otherwise. The 32-year-old Mohammed bin Salman, now the heir to the Saudi throne, has pushed out other rival candidates in recent months, and this appears to be part of a continuation of that tightening a grip on the power in Saudi Arabia. Bin Salman has tried to build a reputation as a reformer, but Saudi Arabia remains one of the most closed and conservative countries in the world, and Bin Salman is most known for intensifying the regional conflict with Iran and managing Saudi Arabia's disastrous war in neighboring Yemen. However, the Trump administration counts him as a valuable ally, and among the dozens of princes, military officers, and top officials arrested was Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. He's one of the world's richest men, a major investor in companies like Citibank, Apple, and the parent company of Fox News, 21st Century Fox. Adding to the concerns about the stability right now in Saudi Arabia was that there was a missile fired from neighboring Yemen into Saudi Arabia. Saudi officials are holding Iran responsible, saying that that's a potential act of war. So there's a lot of issues going on right now, Sandra, in Saudi Arabia that has a lot of people in the region and around the world on edge.
If these reports have any truth in them, the present king, who is quite aged now, he's in his 80s, the present king will remain on as not a chief of state, but as a figurehead, as custodian of the two shrines, meaning the Kaaba and the tomb of Muhammad in Mecca and Medina. This will be transforming. Already, his son has arrested 40 senior Saudi princes and government ministers. A photo was released of them. They're not being held in a conventional prison. They're sleeping on raw mattresses on the floor of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. But they're confined and they're being held in custody, in police custody, in a corruption scandal investigation that is widespread. This prince appears to mean business. The question is, will he bring his economic and political reforms into the realm of dealing with the Wahhab, of the Salafist clergy, of curtailing the power of the Mutawa, the religious police? Will he allow a higher degree of religious freedom, human rights, women's rights? Is this what's going to happen? Will he continue to take his cue from some of the Emirates, such as Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or better still, from Oman? Muscat is a quite tolerant and quite open city compared to Riyadh or compared to Jeddah. I've been to Saudi Arabia and I know what it's like. Can he bring this kind of change about? Now, if these reports are true, he's moved quickly already, but he will move more quickly if indeed his father does step down in the next week to 2 weeks. As we've been saying consistently over the last several weeks, please watch this space. The ramifications, moreover, for potential relations with Israel, if he becomes king, will be insurmountable. He may resort to what Saudi Arabia had been under King Musharraf before the House of Saud came into full power in a jihad, as they call it, with things being the way they have been in this almost medieval, well, actually it was medieval, Dark Ages application of Sharia according to Wahhabism, which only accepts the traditions of Islam from the first 300 years. Can he bring Saudi Arabia out of the darkness of the Dark Ages in which they have been steeped under the Salafists, under Wahhabism? This will be the real test of his power and influence. Can he control the Salafist clergy and the Mutawa? And to what degree can he actually bring about the viable change without creating social instability? Again, Saudi Arabia requires a minimum of a $77 per barrel oil price to sustain its economy at the present levels. Oil prices are well below that. And a situation has been created with American fracking, that the Americans now have a faucet, that if the price of oil goes too high per barrel, the Americans can simply open the tap and bring it down to a degree. This is not good news for Russia, but it's certainly not good news for OPEC, and therefore not good news for Saudi Arabia. This may be what is in part motivating the Saudi Arabians to make the changes that they're making. They no longer have the same muscle and oil power of the petrodollar that they once had. Nothing is more emblematic of this than the arrest of Prince Al-Tawid, who is the managing director of the Kingdom Fund. Again, this Kingdom Fund represents Saudi economic and financial muscle and international investment outside of Saudi Arabia. London, New York, the international markets. Kingdom Fund is a player in all of them, a major player. Now, Prince Al-Tawid is under arrest in Saudi Arabia for corruption.
Yeah, Eric, a surprising move indeed. It's being carried out under the pretext of fighting corruption, as you said. That's the official line coming out from Riyadh, at least officially, but there's a lot of skepticism about what's actually happening right now in Saudi Arabia. In the last few months, the Crown Prince, the now Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has consolidated power and pushed out several other leading candidates for the Saudi throne. The 32-year-old bin Salman has made public statements about not only fighting terrorism, but also modernizing Saudi Arabia and tackling corruption. And the Trump administration counts him as a valuable ally, but he's most known for pursuing an aggressive foreign policy that includes Saudi's war in Yemen, a blockade of U.S. ally and Saudi rival Qatar, and intensifying the regional conflict with Iran. Now, among those princes, military officers, and top officials that were arrested in the last 24 hours, Prince Walid bin Talal. He's one of the world's richest men, a major investor in Citibank, Twitter, and the parent company of Fox News, 21st Century Fox. He's also somebody who has publicly feuded with President Trump, and President Trump has accused him of trying to buy U.S. politicians. Now, in typical fashion, Saudi fashion, Eric, the men have not been taken to a prison, according to reports coming out of Saudi Arabia. Those that have been arrested have been taken to the Ritz-Carlton and are under house arrest there, Eric.
House arrest at the Ritz-Carlton. Haven't heard that ever before. All right, Connor, thank you.
These are interesting times indeed. This Week in Prophecy is already beginning to see major, major changes. It helps us to understand a number of things, possibly. We can construct scenarios simply by speculation, and we must be careful not to do that. But we can begin to see why there's an absence, a general absence of Arab countries in the constellation of opponents of Israel in the Gog and Magog scenario in Ezekiel, if indeed there are two battles of Gog and Magog, which many, including myself, are inclined to believe could be the case. Put, that is, Libya be an exception, but only a partial exception. It would help explain these things. It would help explain a lot of things, and certainly it would have major bearing on our understanding and the practical outworking of the prophecies of Daniel chapter 10 concerning Persia, that is Iran. We need to be very careful and not be taken up by speculation, but we also need to be very, very watchful and very prayerful. This has been This Week in Prophecy. My name is Jacob Prasch, coming to you with Tim Worth, live from England.